Welcome back to Bookish, everybody. We're your virtual program on authors, thinkers, and the literary life produced by the Southern California News Group in conjunction with the Bay Area News Group. I'm Sam Dunn, the senior editor of premium content here. And I first have to give a big thank you to all of our Reader Rewards subscribers for supporting our programs and our publications. Really, we couldn't do anything without you. You are the reason for the season. If you are a Reader Rewards subscriber attending tonight, you, of course, are automatically entered to win a $50 gift certificate for our Vita Book Company in Tustin, one of the wonderful independent bookstores of Southern California. Our winner last month was Libby Solomon. Libby, we hope you're enjoying those books. Drop us a line and tell us what you're reading from it. And speaking of subscriber, if you are not a subscriber yet, why not? In Southern California, go to scng.com/subscribe to find your local paper. In the Bay Area, go to bayareanewsgroup.com/reader services. And then please become a stakeholder in local journalism. It matters now, maybe more than ever. Also, if you've missed our past programs, go to scng.com/virtual programs and check those out. Also, while you're at checking out things, check out our cool Bookish swag. Also, before we get started, I need to remind you, if you have questions, please use the Q&A feature on your Zoom toolbar. Yes, toolbar. And if you want to just add a comment, use the chat feature found on your screen and at the Zoom toolbar as well. And listen, if you have to get up and answer the door or take a phone call, whatever, don't worry, you're not going to miss anything, because a link to the program is going to be sent to you later. The show is also posted at scng.com/virtual events, and it's also on YouTube. So let's get started. Tonight we have a really cool surprise. Our writer, performer, playwright, and longtime co-host Sandra Singh-Low is joining us tonight. Sandra, hello.
Start video.
I just hit
start video. Hello.
Yep. Here you are, darling. You're back from New York, London, Paris, Munich, everybody.
I am indeed, but I've missed you so much, and I'm so happy to be back here on this special evening, I guess.
I am so happy. So I'm going to get out of here because I know that you brought a friend and you want to get going. So
I do indeed. All right. First up, Vince Beiser is my friend and guest today on Bookish. Vince Beiser is an award-winning journalist and author. He's reported from over 100 countries, states, provinces, kingdoms, occupied territories, no man's lands, and disaster zones. He's exposed conditions from California's harshest prisons, trained with U.S. Army soldiers, ridden with First World responders to natural disasters, hunted down other stories from around the world for publications like Wired, The Atlantic, The Guardian, Mother Jones, Economist, Los Angeles Times, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, won 3 National Magazine Awards and an Emmy. His last critically acclaimed book was The World in a Grain of Sand. His amazing new book that you'll tear through is Power Metal, The Race for the Resources That Will Shape the Future. Welcome, Vince. Oh my gosh.
Thanks so much, Sandra.
It's so fun It's so fun to see you. And just to give a look behind the scenes, like your book actually comes out on Tuesday. So what is it being a book author whose book comes out in a couple of days? What does that feel like? And what are you up to?
Is stressful, let me tell you. Like, I'm super excited, but mostly more than that, I'm terrified that nobody's going to notice. The book is going to come out and nobody's going to even know, and I'm going to be, I'm just going to sink back into obscurity. So
there's no way that they won't notice, because it's fantastic, incredibly timely right now. And are you giving out swag?
I have, thanks to you. You gave me, in fact, I got the idea of book swag from you.
Right? Yes, because my book came out in COVID, the pandemic. So I did these COVID safe drive signings out of my driveway and gave swag out of my garage. What's your swag?
So I went to Vista Print, and I got, so I'm going to have a big party at my house on the weekend, which you're invited to. Hey, anybody listening to this podcast, you're invited. It's in Vancouver, Canada, but if you can make it, drop by. Anyway, we're going to have door prizes, and the door prizes include Power Metal coffee mugs, Power Metal, we got a Power Metal tote bag, but not just a regular tote bag, a really nice tote bag, with like the extra pocket and a little hook for your reusable water bottle. We got bookmarks. We got fridge magnets. Swag, baby.
Swag baby. Now, going back for a moment, I think that's a good lead in your reusable water bottle, and I'm sure your environmentally safe tote bag. So tell us, when you start talking about power metal, I think we all have this feeling, or many of us have a feeling, we're in California, let's say, that instead of driving a bad fossil fueled car, we're really good by driving an electric car, because wind and solar power, it's just magic fairy dust that comes out of the air and doesn't hurt the planet at all. Yes, Vince, or no?
No, Sandra, I am sorry to say the answer is no. So, first of all, let me say, I don't want anybody to think that electric cars are like that. You should not buy an electric car. If you're going to buy a car, by all means, make it an electric one. They are definitely better because it's one of our best weapons to stave off climate change, which is the biggest threat we face, of course. But they come with their own costs. Everything has a cost, and that includes all these things that we're really, that we're holding up as the solutions to climate change. Electric cars, solar panels, wind turbines, plus, by the way, all of our digital goodies, all the MacBook that I'm talking to you on, all of our cell phones, your Xbox controller, whatever, they're all made with this same basket of about a dozen odd what are called critical metals. That's things like lithium, cobalt, nickel, rare earths, copper. So to build the millions and millions of electric cars that are already starting to come out, and which we need more of, we have to mine billions of tons of those metals. There's a global race on to find the metals that we need to build all of those, to build all the cars and all the renewable power infrastructure that we need. And that race to get those metals, as a result of that race, rainforests are being cut to the ground in Indonesia. Children are being put to work in mines in the Congo. A unique desert system is being put at risk in Chile. People are getting killed all around the world.
And can you describe a little bit of what this mining looks like, of what the process looks like, to give us able to picture it in our minds, what happens?
Sure. So I mean, it varies, of course, depending on the place and depending on what you're going after, what the target metal is, as they say. But basically, mining is inherently destructive, right? The whole idea is to rip open the earth, to cut down whatever kind of trees and chase away whatever wildlife is in the way, strip up the topsoil, blast apart the rock that's in your way, and then gouge out the rock, the ore that has the metal that you need. And that's just the start of the process. Then you've got a whole bunch of rock, which usually only has maybe 1, 2, maybe 10% of the copper or whatever it is that you're going after. So you got to crush all that rock down. You got to smash it down. You've got to process it with all kinds of chemicals and huge amounts of water often. So the whole process, A, inevitably tears up land. B, uses a whole lot of energy. In fact, mining is responsible for about 7% of all the world's greenhouse gas emissions. And then it also uses oceans of toxic chemicals, which often escape and leak into the water and the ground. So
yeah, and
it's
extraordinary. I think in your book, which is so fantastically fascinating, you're describing an electro-digital age where China is in the news now a lot, and where there's almost a monopoly on these metals there, isn't? Can you talk a little bit about the China issue?
Yeah, for sure. So this is another one of the big issues with this whole era that we're entering into. I call it the electro-digital age because the idea is we're going to electrify everything. Everything's going to run on renewably generated electricity instead of fossil fuels, and that's going to be enabled by digital technology and the internet. Well, as I say, so we need this basket of critical metals to make all that happen. And it turns out that the supply chains for every single one of those metals, to one degree or another, runs through China. Just in the last 20 years or so, through very shrewd exploitation of their own resources, through buying up or buying in stakes in mines in other places, through building up the capacity to do the processing and the refining, China has really gotten a stranglehold on a lot of these things. So it's not only the actual metals themselves, but China also dominates the world in taking those metals and making them into the things that we need. So China produces most of the world's solar panels, a big chunk of the world's wind turbines, and most of the world's electric cars as well. And that's because, largely because we in the United States, decided back in the 70s or so, starting back in the 70s, we wanted to get out of the business of mining and heavy industries with all the pollution and, all the yuck that entails. Nobody wants that in their backyards. Let that happen overseas, right? Let them deal with all the mess and we'll just buy their products. So now that's kind of coming back to bite us because it's given China enormous geopolitical leverage, which they're not shy about using. Just real quickly, in 2010, China and Japan got into a kind of a diplomatic dispute. And China, to punish Japan, cut off exports of a particular set of metals called rare earths. And these rare earths are really important for, among many other things, for consumer electronics. Japan, of course, has this huge consumer electronics industry. All of a sudden, they're cut off from their raw supplies. It sent shockwaves around the world. And it was really the sort of the warning shot that got policymakers here in the US and Canada and really around the world to sit up and start realizing, like, holy smokes, China has really got an incredible amount of leverage that they can use at any time. And we should really do something about that.
Well, okay, and I'm going to say your book it's explosive. It's not all doom and gloom, but there is some. It's like the first half sets up the problem, and the second half has so many fascinating stories about what's happening. And I think one of the issues that caught my attention is of the notion of recycling the metal that we have. And so one example, I think that it's where I kind of, and in my show, The Lowdown on Science, which is on LAS and NPR, we've actually featured your book this month and taken some anecdotes out of it to spark our curiosity. So, for instance, like I could go, any one of us, let's say, and then you can tell me, can go to our kitchen junk drawer and take the old batteries, pieces of cell phone, pieces of wire, right, and recycle them for money. Could we not? Walk me through that process.
So indeed we could and we should, but most of the time we don't, right? Recycling metal and electronic waste, like old charging cables, the millions of old, Apple's changing the type of cable you need every couple of years. So you end up with all these old cables and whatnot. Yeah, those things can be recycled, but it's a hassle, right? It's not like just putting out bottles in your blue bin and the city takes it away. There's no easy way to do it. So there's a number of problems that come with that. So first is most of that stuff doesn't get recycled at all. Only about 1 out of every 6 cell phones in the United States even gets recycled, period. Second problem is recycling is good. Again, it's better than tossing this stuff in a landfill, but it is not at all the pure and unmitigatedly virtuous thing that I certainly used to think of it as, and that most of us do. When we're talking about metals and e-waste, it's extremely energy intensive, uses up a lot of energy, most of which comes from coal-fired and gas-powered power plants. So there's a lot of carbon that gets emitted. It can be very polluting, right? There's all kinds of toxic pollution that gets emitted by the smelters and the machinery of recycling. And also it's often done on the backs of the poorest people in the world. So for my book, I went to Lagos, Nigeria, and I spent some time with e-waste recyclers there. And what happens is, very often, if you do take your old phone or your old laptop to, Best Buy has a recycling bin, maybe your local church or community center did a e-waste recycling drive, great. So some of that stuff might get recycled here. A lot of it is going to end up getting shipped over to a poor country, to a developing country like Nigeria. And there are thousands of people sitting around all day, every day, cracking open old cell phones with hammers and screwdrivers, picking out the little bits of copper and gold that are in there, which then gets sold to recyclers and put back on another diesel spewing container ship and shipped over to a smelter in China or Europe. Meanwhile, the rest of the components, the other components of that phone, the cables, the plastic, whatever, that just gets junked or it gets burned in just open air burn pits. And you can imagine how toxic and vile the smoke of coming off of a fire that's mostly just plastic and rubber is. It's full of dioxins and really serious toxins, which get breathed in by everybody who's living anywhere nearby, adding to the pollution and causing a lot of trouble. So again, I don't want anybody to walk away thinking, oh my God, recycling is terrible, I shouldn't recycle. No, recycling, again, it's better. It is definitely easier on the planet than throwing your old thing away and them having to build a new one from scratch. But it does have really serious costs that we have to be aware of, and then start figuring out how we can minimize. That's kind of the whole message of the book, right? Is like the whole second half of the book, like you said, is really looking at solutions. How can we do these things better? We need to switch over to renewable energy. We need to have electric cars. So how can we do that in ways that are going to, where the damage is going to be less? It's never going to be zero, but we can definitely bring it down a long way.
Another, and one of that is, one of those things is not to just buy ever new cell phones, but perhaps to repair what we have. And you have many heroes in your story. I wonder if you could tell us about a certain student from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. My nephew went there. I'm very fond of that school. Can you tell us a story about that fellow?
Well, since you ask, I surely can. So the fellow you're referring to is a guy named Kyle Wiens. And the story is about 20 odd years ago. He was an engineering student at Cal Poly, and he dropped his laptop and somehow broke the charging port, where you plug it in. A little light went off. And he figured, well, this can't be that hard to fix, right? It's probably just a loose connection or something. So he went online looking for instructions on how to do it and found he couldn't find anything. Not only that, but he came to realize that people who had posted manuals and information on how to repair your MacBook had been ordered to take them down by Apple. And he came to realize that, our modern gadgets, our electronic gadgets, are very difficult to repair. And that is the result of deliberate corporate strategy. They deliberately make these things hard to repair, obviously, so that you have to toss them out and get a new one, right? I mean, I'm sure everybody listening has had this experience. Your dustbuster breaks, your cordless screwdriver doesn't work as well. You take it to a repair shop, if you can even find a repair shop, and they'll probably tell you, meh, it's not worth it. Just chuck it and get a new one, right? This is crazy. That is a crazy approach. It's unbelievably wasteful. It's got to stop. So Kyle and some like-minded folks, first of all, started up an outfit called iFixit that just distributes crowdsourced guides to how to fix anything you can think of, any kind of electric gadget. I think they've got over 100,000 guides up there now to fix everything from, a cordless, from your electric toothbrush to the latest iPhone. But more importantly, I would argue, they've also been spearheading what's called the right to repair movement. And that is a push to get governments, state and federal governments, to pass laws forcing manufacturers to make their gadgets easier to repair, to make spare parts available, to make the manuals and information available, even the tools, man. Like this MacBook that I'm talking to you on, you can't open it with a regular screwdriver. You need to get a special Apple-specific screwdriver. Anyway, the really great news on that front is just in the last year or two, that right to repair movement has started notching up some really significant victories. They got Massachusetts, California, Colorado, and a couple other states have all passed right to repair laws in the last couple of years. They're not perfect, but they are going a long way to making our devices easier to repair. And in fact, manufacturers are even starting to get around to realizing that this is, they're better joining this than getting run over by it. So even Apple, which is kind of the poster child for impossible to repair stuff, they, after fighting tooth and nail against these laws for years, they've completely flipped. They supported the California rule. And and they're doing a bunch of things to make the very, very latest iPhones a little bit easier to repair. So small victory.
Good. So we don't have to say boycott Apple on the show. We can say, okay, they're joining the movement. So I think that will be a big relief. So, well, overall then, yes, we're in a serious, challenging situation right now with all these power metals. But what is your advice? Okay, the two, I guess, final ruminative questions are, why don't more people know about this? For instance, and also we should note in electric cars, you point out such fascinating facts like even the rubber in the tires. Can you explain it, like what pollution comes from that? It's such
Yeah. So unfortunately, even electric cars do emit a certain kind of pollution, which is the rubber on their tires. Yeah, it turns out, and this is true of all cars. They as they're rolling, they're grinding over concrete surfaces, and little bits of micro rubber essentially are constantly breaking off and floating up into the atmosphere. And that might sound like, oh my God, like how like minor can that possibly be? Like how much of that stuff can there be? Turns out a lot, right? Oh, millions and millions of cars. Think about LA, right? Where you are, millions of cars every day going up and down the freeways, all this stuff, it collects and it accumulates. And researchers are starting to find really insane levels of it, especially in lower income communities that tend to be very close to major thoroughfares. So that's a problem that all cars cause. EVs probably create even more of that kind of stuff because they're heavier. Their batteries make them heavier.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So green energy people don't feel entirely virtuous that everything you're doing is magical fairy dust. So I guess then the two questions are, why don't people know more about this? Of course, we have to spread the word of your book far and wide. It's a fascinating read. And I also want to say what a great writer you are. I mean, you're adventuring around the world, chapter titles open, and we feel we're right there with the people. And the scenes that you paint are very filmic, and it's a fantastic read. So why don't people know more about this? How can we spread the word? And what is your advice to all of us in terms of this new electro-digital age?
Yeah, I mean, I do think, awareness is definitely growing. There's certainly, there's been a lot of kind of piecemeal coverage, like little, specific issues like child miners in cobalt, and child miners in Congo. That's gotten quite a lot of attention, deservedly so. Indonesia, less so, but it tends to be sort of fragmented, right? It's like, oh my God, terrible lithium mines in Chile. And then a week later in a different publication, oh my God, terrible cobalt mine in Zambia. So, and it gets, geez, we're all busy. We're all bombarded with way too much information. It's hard to sort of realize that all of that forms that those are all pieces of the big picture. So that's really why I wrote the book in the first place. But I think the second part of your question was, what can we really do? Hey?
Yes. What can we do?
So first of all, I mean, it sounds really trite, but it really goes back to that old slogan from the 70s: reduce, reuse, recycle. I mean, that's really the core of it. But the thing is, we kind of get it backwards in North America. We think of recycling first, right? And again, recycling's fine, but it is not nearly as good of a way to reduce your impact on the planet as reusing stuff, just getting more use out of a thing that you've already bought. That's, reusing way better than recycling. But the best of all, if you the thing that we as individuals have the most, where we can have the most impact is, don't buy a car at all, not even an electric one. And that's a really hard sell in America, especially in LA, I know. And I'm not saying cars are bad. I'm not saying you're a bad person if you own a car. I own a car, right? But I am saying, if at all possible, if you can live your life, or if you can help to get your city organized in such a way that not as many people need cars to get around, we'll all be way better off. Cars are by far the most energy intensive, most resource intensive thing that any of us own outside of our homes, for those of us who own homes. And if we can get by with fewer of them, we will all be way better off. Quick, true life story from my own life. As you know, I used to live in Los Angeles for a long time. It was me, my wife, our two kids. And of course, we had two cars, right? Two adults. You got to have two cars to get around in LA. About 4 years ago, we moved back to my hometown, Vancouver, BC. Immediately, we're able to get rid of one of those cars. Why? Because Vancouver has put a lot of time and energy just in the last 20 years or so into building up a really good bicycle network so you can ride safely and easily all over the city. There's a decent public transit system. There's a really good car share system. So, even same setup, mom, dad, 2 kids, we were able to get everywhere we needed to go, but with only 1 car. And I got to tell you, not only is that better for the planet, it's a relief to me, man. Like, I don't have 1 car. I don't have to worry about parking the thing. I don't have to insure it. I don't have to worry about repairs. It's a huge quality of life upgrade.
Well, yes. Thank you so much. Still in Los Angeles. I had a car, Honda Fit though. It's very gas, but yes, but I see your point, and I think that we all do. So thank you so much, Vince. Congratulations on your book, Power Metal. It is a really fantastic and fascinating read, and everyone should get it so you're aware of what's happening at this point. And congratulations. Looking forward to Tuesday when it comes out. And thanks so much, Vince.
All right. Well,
Vince,
thanks so much.
before you leave,
Great to see you.
Before
Yeah.
you leave, we have 2 questions if you have just a couple more minutes.
Oh, sure.
Indulge us. Rich asks, is the Biden infrastructure bill helping the US get more competitive in some of these areas?
Yes, excellent, very well-informed question. Well, there's 2 really big pieces of legislation the Biden administration passed. One is the Infrastructure Act. Even more important is what's called the Inflation Reduction Act. Terrible name, but among other things, it is sending tens of billions of dollars towards renewable energy, to boost recycling, and to boost the production of critical metals, all these metals we've been talking about.
I see.
Yeah, so and part of it is because of the concerns about China, like it's a real national security issue. So that has been making a difference. That is really helping to raise up all those industries in the US and in sort of other Western countries. Who knows what's going to happen
now? We'll see what happens now.
Yeah.
Steve Carrillo has one more question for you. Vince, do you foresee companies such as Apple changing their business models in accordance with right to repair laws, or will regulations have to be enforced?
I hope so. I think they're going to have. So I do think, companies basically only do things A, if it's profitable, and B, if they're forced. And so I think that the quickest route is to force them to pass more laws, to keep up the pressure with these laws. Because it's not only Apple. I mean, it's really practically everybody who makes electronics, right? It's Westinghouse and Harley Davidson, you name it, all of them have been playing by the same set of rules. So that's, that we need laws, not just individual behavior. But I really think that, this is a little further out, sort of thinking a little further down the line, but I really think there's a possibility that we're going to revive the whole repair industry in this country. Like we used to have a much bigger, many more people made their livings fixing stuff, shoes and zippers and electronics and, the Maytag repairman, if you remember him. Well, those numbers have gone way down because we're in a disposable economy. But I really think, especially as AI is coming and is definitely going to wipe out a whole bunch of, knowledge worker jobs, there's a real opportunity to boost up the recycling center to put people back to work with their hands fixing stuff, because those are good jobs, man. They pay well. You need them in every community in the country, and they can't be exported. So great. I hope we're going to see more of that.
Yeah, Joyce Holman, says we need more jobs in junior colleges like that. I think that is fantastic. Maytag repairman.
Well, thanks, guys. Honestly, this was so fascinating. It's the theme tonight is kind of the story behind everyday things that we see, which we will see next with our next guest, Michael Castleman. Thanks, Sandra, Vince. Looking forward to reading this book, Vince.
All right. Thanks for having me on.
Appreciate it. Next up is Michael Castleman. Michael is a longtime journalist and author of more than 3,000 articles. He's twice been nominated for a National Magazine Award, and he's written 14 nonfiction books and 4 mystery novels. And this book, The Untold Story of Books, I came across on a podcast, and I just knew that I had to talk to him because it is really the most fascinating unveiling of the 600-year history of publishing from the Gutenberg Press to Amazon. And it's written uniquely from an author's point of view. So welcome, Vince. Welcome, Vince. Welcome, Michael. Thanks for having time for us tonight. Appreciate it.
Samantha, thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Well, first of all, I want to talk about why you wrote this book. You have been writing books for your entire professional career. And I understand 18 years ago, you started to look into the business of books. What propelled you and what gave you your interest to do this book in the first place?
Well, I signed my first book contract in 1979. And from that moment on, I thought, well, if I'm going to be in this industry, maybe I should learn something about it. And so I started informally, really as a hobby, reading all about publishing, all the memoirs, and a lot of the research books, and just, it's a niche area, but there's a lot of books published about publishing. And I started reading them just for my own edification and with the vain hope that it would help my career, which it really didn't, but at least I felt better informed and less frustrated.
Well, one of the most interesting things about this book, well, there are so many. First of all, everybody, you got to read this book. If you love books, if you want to write a book, if you read books, you have to read this, because it not only is the history of how publishing comes to be, but it is chock full of interesting trivia bits about the industry and about our relationship to books. But one of the most compelling things that I realized reading what you were laying down was it's really the history of technology, is it not?
Yes, yes. People view books as a sort of secular sacred object. People who love books really love them and worship them in the way that some people have an almost religious feeling about books, which is fine. I do too. But if you look at the more you look at publishing, the more you realize the entire industry is based on the technology of printing. And every time the technology of printing has gone through a major change, the entire book business has been flipped on its head. And that has happened 3 times. We have 3 different business models of books. And I started writing this book in 2006 when it became clear after the millennium that digital technology was not just some new wrinkle in the same old business, but digital technology was completely upending the publishing business, and people who didn't understand that were going to be left behind, or were going to be extremely frustrated, which I often am. And so that was when I thought, is anybody writing a book about this? No, so I'm going to do it. And I spent 18 years writing the 4 drafts of this book.
You mentioned the 3 changes that have happened. Can we talk about that for a little bit? Because what's interesting to me is it seems to have come full circle.
Yes, yes. Well, before 1450, books were written by scribes, by hand, one at a time. And in 1450, when Gutenberg invented the printing press, that was the first mechanical technological advance that enabled fewer people to produce more copies of more books faster and cheaper per copy. And that's what it's all about. Speed of production, reducing the cost per copy, and hopefully making some money at it. So Gutenberg's model worked very well for quite a while. In fact, it was the dominant model until the 1870s, 1880s. So his was the model for 400 years. But then in the late 19th century, Gutenberg style small hand operating printing presses were replaced by enormous steam driven printing plants that were huge and could print thousands of books in the blink of an eye. And that changed everything, because all of a sudden, in the earlier model, if a writer wanted to have a book published, there were no publishers. A writer hired a printer to print it. And
so self-publishing, essentially.
Self-publishing. Right? The original model was all self-publishing. Every famous American author before 1920 self-published in one way or another. All the books you read in high school, all the famous American books were
So
all
the Mark
published.
Twains, the Fenimore Coopers, the,
Right,
you name
right.
it.
Washington Irving, Emily Dickinson, Thoreau, Walt Whitman, you name it. Now, sometimes they had patrons, but they all involved authors or their supporters paying printers to print the book.
Yeah.
Then what happened in around World War I, thanks to these ultra fast printing presses, the printers said, hey, you know, we have to focus on printing. We can't really play publisher anymore. And so a new crowd of publishers stepped up. For example, Bennett Cerf founded Random House in 1925. And Max Schuster and Richard Simon founded Simon & Schuster in 1924. And all of a sudden, these guys who weren't printers were inserting themselves into the business, and they sang a siren song to authors. They said, hey, you don't have to pay printers anymore. Guess what, guys? We're going to pay you. We're going to pay you for manuscripts, and we'll hassle with the printers. Well, authors greeted this with incredible enthusiasm for about 10 years, until they realized they were getting screwed royally by their supposed saviors. And that was when the Authors Guild was founded in 1912 in the early 20th century, to give authors half of a voice at the table. And that was when agents started coming in the early 20th century to try and get authors a better deal. And so the 20th century model is the second book business. So Gutenberg's was the first, industrial publishing was the second, and that went on until about the year 2000, when the digital revolution took place. And all of a sudden, you could produce millions of books without printing at all. You could have ebooks.
From your desk, from the computer that Vince was just talking about, right?
Right, right. So you take your Chinese metal and you put them in a computer, and you suddenly, one lone individual can now publish an infinite number of ebooks in about an hour for $100 and distribute them worldwide for free. So we've sort of reached the technological limit of fewer people producing more books faster and cheaper. And I hasten to add that the second book business is still with us. The legacy publishers, now known as the Big Five, they're
The
still
traditional publishing model, right?
what's
That
called
I grew up
traditional
with, that you
publishing.
grew up with,
Right.
right?
What we grew up with as called traditional publishing, of course, is not traditional at all. The real tradition is self-publishing. But the Big Five model is still with us, and a very small proportion, the favored few authors, still get advances. So right now, 2 million new books are published every year.
Let's just pause for a minute on that number. 2 million new books a year, not total, a year. Go ahead. Sorry, I just need to pause there.
And just to put that in perspective, when I released my first book in 1980, there were 45,000 books published in the United States.
That same year.
And at the time, I thought 45,000, that's immense. No one could read that. Well, now, now it's 2 million a year. And so essentially, digital technology has turned every new release into a blade of grass on a golf course, a snowflake in Antarctica. It's never been easier to release books, and it's never been harder to promote and sell them. And that is what you hear on whenever you get together with authors. It's like, why can't I sell my book? Why my book doesn't sell? Right?
Yeah.
Even though I've sold X number of books in my career. Listen, this is a conversation we have Sandra and I have this conversation a lot. Let me go back to the idea of the traditional model of getting an advance from the publisher. Can you talk about the percentage? The percentage I think you list is only, of that 2 million, only 10,000. Is that right? Do I remember that?
It's approximately 10,000 American authors get advances every year. That is 1/2 of 1% of the people releasing books. That means 99.5% of people do not get advances. I got no advance on the Untold Story of Books. And fortunately, when when the publisher said, oh, we love your idea, we love your manuscript, we want to do it, but there isn't going to be any advance. Well, some authors would say, no advance, forget it, no deal. I knew, fortunately for my own research, I knew that only 0.5% of people was getting advances anyway. So I said to them, fine, let's just negotiate on the royalty rate and see what we can do there. I don't need an advance.
For people who don't know what an advance is, this is the dream of us authors, right? The publisher gives us X number of thousands of dollars to essentially buy our book, but then we have to sell enough to cover that advance before we start making royalties. So I
Right.
just want to give some
And with a
context.
no advance deal, the author makes money from the first book sold.
Yeah.
So there's no indenture to pay off. Now, the fact is that during the 20th century, some authors could actually make a living writing books. I never did, but some do. And today, if you're on the bestseller list, you can make a living writing books. Right now, 80% of new releases sell fewer than 100 copies. That means 4 out of 5 new books sell in 2 figures. And so people who dream of, a first printing of 50,000, forget it. That happens. I mean, you know, if Beyonce wrote a book, maybe, but the rest of us, no. Today, only 6% of books sell 1,000 copies. Only 6% of books sell 1,000 copies.
Well, that was another fascinating thing about this book. The fact that nobody really knows what sells, and the publishers try to game the system. They try to guess what's going to hit, but it's really all speculative stock market play, right? Nobody really knows.
Yes, well, nobody knows what sells, because if everybody knew, that's all they would print.
Yeah. Let me just go through a little list in your book of books that that publishers passed on many, many times. Books like a little thing called Harry Potter, The Naked and the Dead by Norman Mailer, A Time to Kill by John Grisham, The Diary of Anne Frank, MASH, Lord of the Flies, Dubliners, Catch-22, Dune, A Wrinkle in Time, Carrie by Stephen King, Gone with the Wind, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Oh my God, my college boyfriend bought 50 copies of that. And of course, you mentioned your own book that I'm holding in my hand.
Right. Yeah. My book was rejected by 36 publishers before Unnamed Press of LA took it. I mean, if you're writing books, you have to get used to the idea that most publishers are going to say no.
Right.
And you're looking for that one guy who's going to say yes, or you're going to do what increasingly happens in the 21st century, is that you will select one of the various self-publishing options, either doing it all yourself or hiring a publishing services company to bring out your book. And that is now called hybrid publishing. So the author finances the publication of the book, but through a company that gets you an ISBN, that can have it printed, that can have it formatted for ebooks, that can help you build a website, that can do all of the things that modern authors need. But it's going to cost you money. And it costs on average somewhere between $5,000 and $20,000 now to publish a book well through the hybrid model.
Yeah, write him a check. It goes to deflate all of our fantasies about being, you know, Danielle Steele with the mansion in the hills, penning your next book.
Right. Yeah. No, people have said to me, authors have said to me, Mike, your book is good, but it's so depressing. And I said, look, what's really depressing is ignorance. If you don't know what world you're living in, you can't possibly strategize to survive in it. And so that was my whole mission, to lift the veil that has shrouded publishing for so long, and to clue authors and aspiring authors in to the world that they're actually going to inhabit. And once you understand the world you're going to inhabit and how difficult it is to sell books and make money, it's actually liberating. I mean, you know, my book has sold a couple thousand copies, and in the 21st century, that's really good. But, you know, I'm not upset that it hasn't sold 100,000, because I know that that's very, very difficult. That these days, every new book is a blade of grass on a golf course, and it's very hard to get noticed.
Well, that brings up another interesting part that you do talk about, the challenge to books. There's always the naysayers who say that this is the end of books, but somehow books always survive.
Right. Ever since there have been new communication media, books, like I said, are sort of sacred secular objects. People worship books in a way that they don't worship, radio shows, or for example. Although, I love lots of radio shows, but books have a different spiritual hold on people. And so anytime anything got introduced, any new communication medium, book lovers would say, "Oh my God, it's going to kill books." This happened when the phonograph was invented in the 1870s. People said, "Oh my God, people are going to stop reading. They're just going to listen to records." No, they didn't. When radio was invented in 1895, people said, "Oh God, people are just going to listen to the radio. They're not going to read books." No, they kept reading books. In fact, there were radio shows about books.
Like today.
When movies were invented, movies were first screened in the United States in 1905. And by 1920, a mere 15 years later, there was theaters everywhere, and people went to the movies and loved the movies. And people said, "Oh, it's going to kill books." Well, not only movies didn't kill books. In fact, books got made into movies. So
Yes.
in our age, in our lifetime, television was predicted to kill books. No, it didn't kill books. VCRs, computers, Facebook, TikTok, everything, any new communications medium, the self-styled guardians of the sanctity of books have said, "Oh, it's going to kill books." And the irony of all this is nothing has ever killed books. And the people who claim to revere books the most and fear most for their future, they have no faith in it. They have no faith in reading. I'm here to tell you, books are here to stay. Nothing's going to kill books. I don't care what AI widget shows up in the next however long, many years. I'm going to keep reading books, and I think a lot of other people will too. Now, not everybody reads books for pleasure. Not everyone is involved in recreational reading. And every now and then there is some report that's, breastfeeding about how people aren't reading as much. No, people can continue to read. Americans buy almost 1 billion books a year. And that doesn't even count all the multiple readings you get from public libraries. So a nation of 330 million is reading 1 or 2 billion books a year. That doesn't sound, that's like 5 or 6 a person per year. That sounds pretty healthy to me.
It sounds pretty healthy to me, and which is why we are here, which is why Bookish has been going for 4 years and will continue to go. I was going to let you go, Michael, but we have a couple questions if you don't mind sticking around.
Sure, love to.
Rick asks, in the digital age, do authors get more potential revenue streams? Haha, you want to take that?
Well, no, the revenue streams for authors are pretty tough. I mean, yes, you do get royalties on my book. On The Untold Story of Books, I am in for 30% of the publisher's net, which can be audited, and there's all kinds of details, but it's pretty good. I mean, I make $1 or $2 a book. So you can make some money that way. But remember, the typical book, only 6% sell 1,000. So, only 6% of authors are making $1 or $2 a book of serious money. The other ways that authors can make money is lecturing, speaking engagements, and teaching and writing and teaching classes, which authors have been doing, since time immemorial. But frankly, if you go into the writing game, you cannot expect to make a living at it. I do not make a living writing books. I never have after 19 books. You know how I make my living? I was a freelance magazine writer for 35 years. And then during that time, I was able to buy some property. And now I'm a landlord. and I own some apartment buildings in San Francisco, and I rent them and I manage them. And that's where I make my money. And my book writing is much more of a labor of love.
I think that's the majority of us. A good friend of mine, after this was a few years, more than a few years ago, after winning a Pulitzer Prize for his novel, and after having the novel made into a very successful movie with famous actors, he was a couple years out of it, and he was looking for a teaching gig because he knew it wouldn't last forever. The checks were running thin. So there we go.
Yeah.
That's the life.
My advice to authors: get a job you can live with and write your books on your own time.
One more question. Stephen Carrillo asks, Michael, it's ancient history now, but how did writers like Dashiell Hammett, who started writing in the pulps, find success? Oh, this is an interesting point. You talk about pulp fiction in the book.
Yes, pulp fiction is books printed on low quality paper that's made out of sawdust, wood pulp. That's how it got its name. And very few pulp writers made any money at all, because the books were sold for very cheaply, and the publishers screwed the authors. It was even worse than the Big Five. But a few did break through, and Dashiell Hammett was one of them. And Louis L'Amour, who was a writer of Westerns,
Yes.
through. And so, they got lucky. I don't know what, magic they worked, but just for whatever reason, they got lucky. I mean, Ian Fleming, who wrote the James Bond books, Ian Fleming made no money at all. I mean, he was like destitute until 1960, when John Kennedy was elected president, and some reporter saw him reading an Ian Fleming book and said, "What's that?" And the guy said, "Oh, it's a spy novel that by this English guy. I kind of like it." And when John Kennedy said, "Read Ian Fleming," suddenly Ian Fleming was huge, and all the movies got made. So that's, there's no real telling what goes.
Luck of the draw. Luck of the draw. Michael, this is fascinating. And everybody, honestly, you got to get this book. It came out in the summer, but it's one of those timeless books you just have to read. And Vince, I know you're still with us. Don't despair. I know you've got your book coming out this week. So anyway, thanks again, everybody.
Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it was such a pleasure. And Sandra, Vince, thanks for joining us tonight. And as always, thanks to our production manager, Julie Corlett. She's the Oz behind the curtain. We hope you've enjoyed tonight's conversation. How can you not? It was fantastic. Next month, Bookish will be back with another lineup of great authors. Marcia Clark, yes, Marcia Clark from O.J. Simpson trial fame, and Francesca Leah Block will be with us. Meanwhile, you can catch up on our past episodes and check out our other virtual programs too. If you'd like to share your thoughts from today, or if you have additional questions, please email us at events@scng.com. And if you want to give me suggestions on the show directly, reach me at sdunn@scng.com. And remember, you can always find great coverage on books in our newspapers every single day and online at our sites. Have a great night, everybody. We hope to see you next time. Bye. Thanks.